Welcome back to Hot Movies. Today I will recap a 1991 drama movie named Close My Eyes. The film opens with a man named Richard going to dinner at his stepsister Natalie's house. Natalie was very upset because she was recently divorced. Seeing this, Richard takes her for a walk, and as they sit in a restaurant, Richard talks to Natalie, and that is something that Natalie really likes and forgets her sadness, and Natalie thanks Richard because today she had fun. At that time at night Natalie kisses Richard, but she realizes that she did wrong, so she apologized to Richard and went to sleep. But then we see Richard and we realize that he likes everything, and we find out that Richard has feelings. And he started liking Natalie. But despite all this he says nothing to Natalie. Then we will see the scene in 2 years. This time Richard went out of town for work, then Natalie comes to drop him at the station. When Natalie calls Richard, he is with his secretary, and knowing this Natalie hangs up the phone. And many years pass, and until now Natalie was married to a man named Sinclair, and now Natalie calls Richard and invites him to dinner, and says this is for you to meet my husband. Richard could not attend Natalie's wedding, so he has not yet met Natalie's husband. Now the next day Richard comes to Natalie's house for dinner, and is surprised to see Sinclair's house because his house was very luxurious and big. Richard didn't know Sinclair was so rich. Upon arriving at the house, Richard is greeted by Sinclair and his family, and then Sinclair and Richard have a big talk, during which Richard learns that today is Natalie's birthday and that's why she invited him. Richard forgot Natalie's birthday, and when Natalie cut the cake, we see that Richard was continuously gazing Natalie. Seeing this, we realize that even after so many years, Richard could not forget Natalie, and still likes her to this day. After we see Richard at work the next day, Natalie comes in with Sinclair. The next day Natalie tells Richard that she has to talk about something important to him, so she will come to Richard's place, and Richard agrees. That night, Natalie meets Richard at his house, but she arrived too late. So Richard gets angry with her at first, but then Natalie apologizes to Richard. And shortly after that she kisses Richard, but she pulls back because she felt like she's making the same mistake again, but then she can't hold herself for long, and they get intimate there. Later, before returning, Natalie tells Richard that whatever happened between us today, forget it and we will never do it again. Next we see Sinclair and Richard talking, where Sinclair tells Richard that he is going on a picnic with his family, so he invites Richard along. But Natalie refuses because she has come to understand how Richard feels about her. But still Richard comes to the picnic, and here just clicks Natalie's picture. Tired of this, Natalie gets up and goes to the other side, and Richard follows her. Here we learn that Natalie did not want to allow Richard to the picnic because she felt that everything they did that day was wrong, and she was ashamed of it. After returning home, Richard talks to Natalie about that night, and Natalie says we can't talk about it here, we have to go somewhere private. But after a while, Natalie remembers that Sinclair and her parents went out for a walk, and no one is home, so she asks Richard to meet her at home in a few days, and also makes it clear that they are both just talking and not doing anything. A few days later, Natalie tells Sinclair that she has to go to work for a few days, to which Sinclair agrees. Here we learn that Natalie wants to spend time with Richard while lying to Sinclair. Then we see Natalie and Richard at his place. They were here to talk, but they couldn't help getting closer and get intimate. After that Natalie calls Sinclair and asks for her belongings. Meanwhile, many days pass, and one day Sinclair was having a lot of problems in the kitchen, so he contacts Natalie's hotel and requests to speak with Natalie, and he discovers that Natalie hasn't been at the hotel she mentioned. Because Sinclair needed to talk to Natalie in any case, he phones each hotel in the city one by one and inquires about her. But Natalie did not stay in any of them, as she was spending all of her time with Richard. After this, Sinclair begins to have thoughts about Natalie and suspects she is being involved with someone. Natalie, in contrast, believes that everything is going wrong and wants Richard to end the affair, but Richard is deeply in love with Natalie, and by this point, and denies. Natalie then advises Richard to find a girlfriend, so that he will not miss her. When she returns home, Sinclair then questions Natalie how her hotel experience was. Afterwards Natalie says the hotel was fantastic because she didn't realize Sinclair discovered she didn't stay at a hotel. Richard, on the other hand, begins an affair with his ex-girlfriend, which he reveals to Natalie over the phone. Although Natalie doesn't speak much because Sinclair is sitting next to her, and the next day we find Natalie crying while glancing at Richard's picture, which reveals her feelings for Richard. Next day Natalie and Richard met at a hotel, and Natalie says Richard that they need to avoid meeting since Natalie believes Sinclair has gotten suspicious of them, and Sinclair probed about their hotel the previous time they met. Richard refuses to accept this because he loves Natalie, however Natalie departs by kissing him. Following a few days, Richard realizes how much he misses Natalie. So he heads to her place, and when he is there, he discovers that Natalie is not there. After a few days, Sinclair takes him for boating and informs Richard that he believes Natalie is being involved with somebody else. On this, Richard claims that you are mistaken and that there is no such thing. He was saying this because he was the one having an affair with Natalie, but Sinclair tells him that she once lied with him regarding her hotel and she goes to see someone. He continues, "You are her brother, therefore you will finally discover with whom she is having an affair," but Richard denies knowing anything about it. Next, Sinclair informs him that I have devised a way to find out about it, but Sinclair does not reveal the plan to Richard. They return home after this, and Natalie has also arrived by then, and he learns from Natalie that they will be living in America forever. Richard is stunned to learn that he will never meet Natalie. So one day Natalie sees Richard at a hotel, and she tells him that they need to stop doing this, or else they will destroy each other, but Richard does not agree with her. He also stops Natalie from going to America, and during this time he begins crying a lot. Then Natalie speaks to him, and departs from there. Now Richard is feeling really horrible about this, which is why he attempts suicide by taking sleeping pills, although Natalie saves him, and also asks him to a party that they were throwing for their friends and family to say goodbye. The party scene follows, in which Natalie appears overjoyed with Sinclair, and Richard follows her everywhere. He becomes enraged with Natalie and accuses her of merely using him. She used to come closer to him whenever she needed. She never bothered about him, and now she is leaving him. Hearing all of this, she realizes her mistakes and informs him that they will not be moving to America. Hearing this, Richard relaxes because Natalie will never leave this place, and Richard can see her as before. Following this, we see Richard, Natalie, and Sinclair, and we discover from their discussion that Sinclair was previously aware of Richard and Natalie's illicit relationship, so he devised this plan to move to America so that he could find everything about their affair. Learning that they are leaving for America, Richard was behaving suspiciously, so he realized Natalie's affair was taking place with no one else but her own brother. Afterwards, both of them apologize, and Sinclair forgives them because he does not want to lose Natalie. Then after, we can see three of them walking somewhere, and the film ends. Let me know what you all think in the comments section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss the next recap.